Okay, can hear me? Yes? Yes, okay, good. Um, Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another random walk down Mill Street. We are gonna do a short topic today, very dedicated to one specific person, and just giving you a little biographical information about a little known character from the history of Shereth Israel. Um, and as I said just before we start the recording, this class, the Random Walk Down Mill Street series, will now not meet weekly, but every other week. So beginning this week, we'll meet. We won't meet next week, and so on. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. Okay. Um, the topic for this week is a man named Marcus van Gelderen. And I'm going to share my screen with you now to show the our PowerPoint. Okay. And I titled it A Portrait of Marcus van Gelderen, Shochet, an Agricultural Pioneer. You can put in the chat if you know the name Marcus van Gelderen, if you recognize the name Marcus van Gelderen, let me know. I'm very curious who knows this chapter of Shereth Israel's history. Very, very minor chapter in the long history of our congregation. But if you visit the synagogue today, if you visit Shereth Israel today, you will walk into the synagogue and the building, and before you get to the sanctuary, you walk up a few stairs. And on your left, if you're entering the synagogue, there are 4 portraits on the wall. First is a man named Joshua Isaacs, who was a veteran of the American Revolution, Parnas of the congregation in the 1790s or so. Then in the middle, there is Mordechai Emanuel Noah and his wife, Rebecca Jackson Noah. And maybe I'll have classes on all of these people. I know I've mentioned Mordechai Emanuel Noah before. I know I've mentioned Joshua Isaacs before. And then the last portrait is a man named Marcus van Gelderen. And that's who we're going to talk about today. Thank you, Vivette, unknown to me. So here's his picture. You may recognize him from the lobby of Shereth Israel. If not, take a look, be on the lookout next time you come to the synagogue. And this is a picture of him as a young man, which is quite interesting because he had a relatively long life. This is a picture of him as a young man. He was born in 1798 and died in 1871. Not long by today's standards, but pretty long from the 19th century. And he was, as we shall see, a shochet, a butcher, a slaughterer, a kosher butcher in America in a relatively early period. Okay. If you look for this portrait on the Loeb database of early American Jewish portraits, this is the biography you will see. Few details survive about the life of Marcus van Gelderen. Born in Holland, he came to New York in the early 19th century, where he was involved with the congregation of Shereth Israel. They spelled Shereth wrong, and served as a shochet. That is all you get. And if you search, you might be able to find a few more things by Googling, which is what I did, but not a whole lot. So let's take a look at what we know about Marcus van Gelderen. So the first thing you need to know is that he was born in Holland in 1798. And I tried to find his birth record. There's a lot of great archival records in the Netherlands. I was not able to find his birth record. Perhaps his name was not Marcus, or I don't know what his first name would have been in Dutch. But anyway, I wasn't able to find his birth record in Holland. So I don't know much about his family or origins. Although there are other Van Gelderen family members in our synagogue. So there is still room to work on his genealogy. But we do know the first time we see him is in 1825. First time we see him in Shereth Israel is in 1825. And we're going to get to where we see him a little bit more details, but I just want to show you, this is a list of shochtim, the shochet and the bodek, the person who slaughters and the person who checks the meat that it's kasher, to make sure there's no treifa in the meat. This is a constitutionally required position in the synagogue. To this day, we still have a Shochet. Every year we elect a Shochet. Currently, it's Rabbi Ira Road. And this is a list going from the earliest times of the congregation until around 1860. And if you go through this list, you will see that in 1825, a man named Marcus van Gelder served as the Shochet. And then again in 1860, Marcus van Gelderen, spelt differently, served as the Shochet. Now, when you look at the archival records, you'll see lots of different references to the Shochet and the Bodek, because, as I mentioned, this was a constitutionally required position. That means that, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Here we go. That means that each year the congregation electors vote for 3 offices. The first is the Chazan, then the Shamash, that's me currently, and the Shochet. And today, we don't think much about these. It's sort of pro forma. We were just checking off the boxes that are required by the Constitution. But in an earlier period, these were essential positions for communal life. The Chazan, who would lead the prayers and essentially be the minister of the congregation. The Shamash, who would take care of the building and the facilities and the cemetery. And the Shochet, who provided kosher meat to the community. Shearith Israel was the only Jewish synagogue which served all the Jews of New York from 1654. If you prefer, you can say 1728 or 1709, whichever origin you want to say for the founding of the congregation properly. But from all that period, from the colonial period of 1654 until 1825, there was only one congregation, and that was Shearith Israel. And it was required to supervise the providing of kosher meat for those who wish to eat kosher food, the Jewish community of New York. And you get all sorts of records in the archives about it. In fact, in certain periods in the colonial era, before the American Revolution, New York was an exporter of meat to Sephardic communities in the Caribbean, to Suriname and Curacao. And you'll get records about that. You'll get controversies about accusations that the Shochet didn't do something properly, or that the lead seal was not affixed properly, and all sorts of interesting records about that. And the other thing that you'll get is the approbation of the congregation. And so here on this page, just one as an example, this one is from 1802. It says, "Gentlemen, having been appointed by your board to serve as a committee to examine the Shochet and Bodek of our congregation with respect to the rules observed in killing and," I don't know what that says, "searching of Jewish," no, that's not what it says, "of such creatures as may be eaten by our brethren," of kosher food, and also as to the, setting and ascertaining of the goodness of the knife, do hereby certify that we have found him perfect in both cases. He knows how to make a do shchita, and the knife he's using is appropriate to use. And we are of the opinion that this certificate be considered as sufficient for the term of 2 years, unless something particular should occur unexpectedly. In witness thereof, we sign our names: Gershom and Yiseshes Chazan, Jacob Hart Sr., who also signs a little bit in Hebrew, although I think it says Shetichia, I'm not sure what it says there, and I.B. Kershit. So Gershom and Yiseshes with the Chazan, pretty famous. Jacob Hart, I think we've mentioned in the past, when we talked about the seal of Shearith Israel. And I.B. Kershit is Israel Ber Kershit, who was the son-in-law of Gershom and Yiseshes, and probably the most learned Jew in America, for a long period of time, until ordained rabbis started coming in the 1830s, 1840s. And so that's just an example. And every couple of years, you get another certificate like this, certifying that the Shochet of the congregation is fit to do his job. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this is in 1825, we get the following note in the minutes. I decided to give you a printed version so we could read it easier than the handwriting of the secretary of the congregation at the time. But you get this, August 17th, 1825. The committee appointed at the last meeting on the subject of the Shochet report that they have visited Mr. Mark Solomon and find that he will not be able to attend to his duty of Shochet for at least 2 weeks, that they advised him not to go out until he was well, and that when perfectly restored, for him to address a letter to the Parnas, advising him thereof, and his readiness and ability to resume his business. So Mark Solomon, the Shochet, was ill and could not serve as Shochet. The committee also reported that Mr. Abraham Cohen has been, since the sickness of Mr. Solomon, performing the duties of Shochet, assisted in the labor in part by Marcus van Gelder, by the direction of the Parnas. As Mr. van Gelder was a stranger to the committee, they considered it advisable to have him examined as to his capability for a Shochet and Bodek. The result of his examination is hereunto annexed. Having thus far executed their duties, the committee deem it proper to state that they are of the opinion that the present mode of supplying the market with kosher meat, meaning in New York in 1825, as well as the manner of remunerating the Shochet, might be placed on more eligible footing. The office of Shochet may be made more respectable and more independent of the butchers than at present. The mode that appears preferable to the committee is that the trustees should agree with a sufficient number of butchers to supply the different markets with kosher meat, each of them to pay such sum as may be agreed on in lieu of the prerequisites now given to the Shochet. So this is going on. This is just interesting New York City history. So as I mentioned, Shearith Israel felt itself responsible for supplying kosher meat, and it had a constitutional requirement to make sure the congregation had a Shochet at all times. But already for about 10 years, at the time that this letter is being written, or this trustee minute is being written, the Jewish community had the elected Shochet from Shearith Israel, and occasionally, from time to time, additional kosher butchers in the New York area. That started already from a controversy at Shearith Israel with the Shochet in 1811 or so, and so for about a decade there were more than one Shochet, but only one was elected and approved by the congregation. And so it's talking about how to make the situation better for the Shochetim and for the congregation. Anyway, the part that I like here is that this is the first mentioning of Marcus van Gelder. Here described as Marcus van Gelder. And in this printed version, they didn't give you his approbation. So I went back to the archives and I found the original. And here is the approbation that appears on the next page of the minutes. A little hard to read, but we'll read it here. We do certify that we have examined Mr. Marcus van Gelder as a Shochet and Bodek, and find him well acquainted with the, I think it says dinim, or maybe domain, I think dinim, and that he also has a perfect ability to set his knife for slaying according to the law of the same. New York, Mar Cheshvan, 5585, signed M.L.M. Peshotto, that's the Chazan of the congregation, Naftali Phillips, who's the Parnas of the congregation, and Abraham H. Cohen, who was also served as a Shochet, as we saw in the message earlier. So Van Gelderen was examined, found to be acceptable, and became the Chazan, the Shochet of the community in 1825. But then what happened? Because as we saw earlier, shortly after he served in 1825, they have someone named Joseph Samuels comes in later in the year, and Gustav Poznansky, we can talk about him, he's an interesting character in history as well. And they go away from Marcus van Gelder. So what happened to Marcus van Gelder? So finding records about him are a little hard, but I did find some secondary material in a book called The Forerunners, Dutch Jewry in North American Diaspora. And here we learn the following. And I'm just going to read it to you because I couldn't say it any better. Other Dutch lay leaders in synagogue life, besides those who had already mentioned earlier in the book, were Reverend Moses MLM Pashoto of Sheret Israel, who was the Havan, Marcus van Gelderen, the first kosher butcher of Bnei Jeshurun in the 1820s and 1830s, and later president of Anshe Chesed. Van Gelderen was certified by the Chacham in Amsterdam. And then it goes on. So here we learn that Van Gelderen was not from Sheret Israel's community. He was the Shochet of Bnei Jeshurun and later on Anshe Chesed. Bnei Jeshurun was the first breakaway Ashkenazic synagogue from Sheret Israel in 1825. And so they must have elected Van Gelderen. And when they had a problem the same year, Sheret Israel also relied on Van Gelderen to be the Shochet. And then we learned that he was later on the president of Anshe Chesed. Anshe Chesed, if you're keeping track, is also a spin-off of Bnei Jeshurun, which I think occurred in the 1830s or 1840s. So Van Gelderen was Ashkenazic Shochet from Amsterdam, who served the Ashkenazic Jewish community of New York in 1825, as well as Sheret Israel, and had a pretty prominent role in the Ashkenazic Jewish community of New York in the 1830s, becoming the president of Anshe Chesed. Anshe Chesed, by the way, Bnei Sheret Israel, as you know, still exists. Bnei Jeshurun still exists. Anshe Chesed still exists. All these communities are still around today. But then we learned something very interesting a little later on in the book, and this is the surprising part of today's class or presentation. No Dutch Jews in New York City or county worked in agriculture between 1850 and 1870. But in the late 1830s, several had a leading part in an attempt to plant an agricultural colony in Ulster County, New York. The Sholem Colony, first concerted effort to found a Jewish agricultural colony, originated in 1837, when a committee of Anshe Chesed synagogue selected a large tract of land in Ulster County. 3 of the 4 committee members were Dutch: Moses S. Cohen, Marcus van Gelderen, and William N. Pollock, sometimes also known as Wolf Pollock. In all, 12 families bought land, including Cohen, van Gelderen, Pollock, and another Dutchman named Davies. Van Gelderen, born in the Netherlands in 1798, had come to New York in 1822. Davies was also born in Holland. Pollock immediately conveyed his land to a fellow Hollander named Moses Content. And the timing of this venture to create an agricultural colony in Ulster County was inopportune. The Panic of 1837 struck just as the colony began, and in addition, their land was stony, unsuitable for farming. Sholem Colony failed within a few years in 1841, and the mortgages were foreclosed, and some of them were refinanced, but essentially all this project was abandoned and the settlers returned to New York City. Van Gelderen was the first kosher butcher at Bnei Jeshurun in Sheret Israel and later became president of Anshe Chesed. Okay, that's the story. Okay. So we have this Shochet from Amsterdam, who was prominent in the Ashkenazic community and in Anshe Chesed, who in 1837 attempts, along with some other Dutchmen and others, to create an agricultural colony in Ulster County. Ulster County is pretty much the same as the Catskills. I don't know how many of you went to the Borscht Belt or whatever, went to the Catskill Mountains, Catskill Falls or whatnot, and when it was a thing. But that's essentially the area that we're talking about. In an area called Warning or something like that, and they attempted to start a colony. And that colony is talked about a little bit in a 1912 article called Old Ulster. The journal is called Old Ulster, and there we can see a little more about this colony. By the way, here's a map from the 19th century. Warsing, that's what it's called. That's the county or whatnot. No, Ulster County. This is Warsing, and you can see here on this map. This is long after the colony has failed. You still see it's called Sholem in this upper part of Wawarsing, near Brownville. I think Brownville still exists. I think a lot of these names no longer are used. In any event, here is what it says about this colony. The colonists contract with a man named Rich of Neponok for the erection of a dozen houses for residences, a store, a synagogue, a museum, an art building, and 2 factories. When the colonists arrived, they were found to be highly educated people possessed of a taste for art and music, and who loved and sought social intercourse with all their neighbors. Their store was stocked with a general assortment of goods, the museum filled with attractions, and the art gallery with many oil paintings. Customers at the store were first received in a reception room, given a cup of tea and cakes, and then permitted to trade. I like that little detail. One factory was devoted to the manufacturing of goose quill pens. Quills were purchased by the wagon load in New York, sent to Rondout, and brought to Sholem. Here they were boiled in oil, scraped, split, tied in bunches of a dozen quills with bright red ribbon. Then they were transported back to New York. Mr. Castor conducted a fur cap factory using local furs as well as seal. Farms were cleared and fenced, and the homes were models of neatness and thrift. Some members of the colony peddled with packs. Others were traveling shoemakers and tailors, all engaged in some employment and prospered. The Reverend Solomon Samuelson was the rabbi, and it is the opinion in the vicinity that these colonists were refugees from persecution in some country in Europe. Okay, I don't know. They came laden with a quantity of rich furniture, the household effects, and beautiful paintings. They seem to have been a people once possessed of wealth, which may have been swept away by such an experience. So, but as we know, this colony failed within 4 years, only lasted for 4 years. And Marcus van Gelderen was one of the prominent members of this agricultural colony. Now, this was the line used by anyone who mentioned this colony, Sholem, for about 60, 70 years. From this article, from the time of this article in 1912, where Dr. Poole has an article in the publication of the American Jewish Historical Society about it, also calls it an agricultural colony. It's mentioned later in the 40s also as an agricultural colony. But more recent evidence, more recent scholarship. Oh, whoops, did I miss it? Oh, okay. Let's see if I can share this with you. Okay. More recent scholarship, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Appeared in an article by Michelle Ferris called The Sholem Community, Reimagining a Jewish Agricultural Community as the First Jewish Resort in the Catskill Mountains. And what she does is she goes through the evidence and says, there is no way that these 12 settlers thought they were making an agricultural colony. They bought land on the side of a mountain. There were no, not farming, land. They made a museum in, they brought art with them and a museum, and they made an inn. These were not farmers. And she goes through other evidence showing that at this time, New York City people were starting to go on vacations in the Catskill Mountains. And these people probably were trying to create a resort for Jewish people who kept kosher to escape the city in the summers or whenever to go to the Catskills, much as people do today. And that is, or did, and that is what was going on in the Sholem community. So anyway, that is that. And we don't hear much more about Marcus van Gelderen too much after the failure of his of this venture. So in 1841, 1842, he comes back to New York City. He's listed in the New York City directories in 1850 and 1860, and as a butcher, and he has a house, I think, on Allen Street in Lower Manhattan. And in 1860, he's elected the Shochet of Congregation Shearith Israel, a position which he fills until his death in 1871. Now, by 1860, the Shochet of Shearith Israel, I mean, he was a kosher butcher, but his function and his need to the fact that Jews could buy kosher meat with many other sources, maybe not as bountiful as today, but they weren't only looking to one source for their kosher meat anymore. But still, the Shearith Israel community probably made use of him more exclusively than others because he was the elected Shochet. He's buried in our cemetery, so in Shearith Israel Cemetery. So he became essentially a member of Shearith Israel, wasn't only an employee and a member of the community. And the last thing that I have to show you, let's see here, is his let's see, where is it? Okay. Is his will. And you can find it online, or if you know where to look, you can find his will, because it was probated, and it's a little bit quaint, and I kind of like it, so I'm going to read part of it to you. In the name of God, it was executed, I think, in June or July of 1871. He died in August, so very close to the end of his life. In the name of God, Amen. I, Marcus Van Gelderen of the city of County of the state of New York, being of sound mind and memory, but mindful of my mortality and the uncertainty of human life, do make, publish, and declare this as and for my last will and testament, hereby revoking all former and other wills. I give and bequeath unto Rachel Solomon, daughter of Israel J. Solomon of the city of New York, any and all monies belonging to me, and now on deposit in the butcher's, and I think it says Drover's Savings Bank in the city of New York. Now that would have been something I should have researched because it sounds interesting, the Butcher's and Drover's Savings Bank. But anyway, the butcher, Marcus Van Gelderen, had money in the Butcher's Bank, and he gives them to Rachel Solomon, who is the daughter of Israel J. Solomon. Israel J. Solomon, I don't know much about him. He is also a Dutch immigrant to America. He is a member of Shearith Israel. One of the historic Sifrei Torah we have here in Shearith Israel is known as the Israel J. Solomon Sefer. So he donated a Sefer Torah to Shearith Israel, and that's about all I know about him. And then it goes on. You don't have to go the rest of the will, but that's kind of interesting. He died in 1871, and the witnesses who attest to his will, which is also the next page in the city records, in the probate records, are the attestations of the witnesses, and one of them is Philip J. Joachimson, who was the Parnas of Shearith Israel, and he in his just formulaic legal language, but he tells that he knows Marcus Van Gelderen for the last 16 years. So you could calculate back from 1871 to when Philip Joachimson first met him, and it's in the 1850s. It's before he became the Shochet in 1860. So it's in the 1850s. So sometime between the failure of the Sholem community and his attendance at Anshe Chesed, Van Gelderen comes to Shearith Israel and becomes a member of the community, and that's where he serves, and that's where he dies in 1871 and is buried in our cemetery. And that, my friends, is the whole presentation today. So when you come to Shearith Israel, and you look up and you see Marcus Van Gelderen, and here he is, you now have a better appreciation of who he was. He wasn't just some guy. He's a Dutch immigrant who started the first Jewish hotel in the Catskills in 1837. Oh, let me stop the recording and let everyone talk. Okay.